and he's working with Wilson to prepare a manual for publication. And so he has a West family. We have his wife, and he has a baby, a new baby. So that puts a lot of pressure on him, apparently. And then basically also we have HSU, or Harlan State University, and he has been offered a grant for their, he says that if he gets a grant for there, they will offer him tenureship. So that's another pressure that he has on him. So what we have is Charlie West. He kind of puts off his work for Wilson's lab to kind of work on the grant that he has for Harlan State University, and also because his family is trying to work with them. And so basically he keeps on putting off work from Wilson's lab, and he works on this grant. And at some point he gets about most of the grant written, but now he has to work on the background section. But at the same time, Wilson is trying to get on him about being doing his work, and that he needs to get his publication finished for their lab. And so basically we get up to like the final scenario is where he has 3 days left to get the grant so that he can get tenureship. And he found a background section from another grant, and he says that it has about 90% of the information he needs, and that he'll make up the other 10% of the information. And so at that point in time, he wants to just take it word for word without referencing it, and put in some new references and stuff. And so that comes to our dilemma that we have to discuss.
Alright. So, the IEEE Code of Ethics that was violated was number 7, which was to seek and accept and offer honest criticism of technical work, to acknowledge and correct errors, and to credit properly the contributions of others. So, he's trying to take the background section from another grant. It's obviously not going to credit, well, it doesn't seem like he's going to give them credit for that. And then also number 10, to assist colleagues and coworkers in their professional development and to support them in following this code of ethics. Because he needs to help Professor Wilson with the experiments that he has to do for him so they can finish that publication. So, a couple solutions we had where he could ask for an extension for his grant, and if he can't do that, he could also aim for another deadline, because in this it says he's aiming for a deadline. It doesn't say he has to have it in. He doesn't have to have it finished anywhere. He could also, we also think he should definitely help out Professor Wilson and make up for the lost time he had. So what could happen if he continues stealing this background material? He could get found, they could find out, and he could probably lose his grant and the job that he has at HSU. And if he doesn't help out Professor Wilson, they could lose that publication that says Joe Atkins' lab could take their
Scoop them, right?
scoop them, yes. So that's what we have.
So if I summarize, what you have is a classic case of stress,
Yeah,
right?
pretty much.
Because he's caught in the place between one lab, a new job, a family, and the ability to cut corners on a deadline, which is self-imposed, as you smartly pointed out, right? And then there's another person, which is the third from the bottom. He's basically going to lift material from his previous life as a graduate student and fold it into his new work, right? So he's basically, he's beholden to all of these people, right? Both ethically and in terms of like providing for his family as well. So I think you're smart to suggest that one of the ways to deal with this situation is to realize that he's under stress and some of it is self-imposed, right? Because if I paraphrase for everyone else, what he was told is he's been offered a job at HSU. The department chair has told him it'd be really great if you got funded now. He hasn't actually started the job yet, right? He's still working for someone else. And they're basically suggesting to him, and it's kind of a breach of ethics on their part, but it's totally legitimate stress that people put on people, is why don't you write this grant before you even get here, right? So basically, and he's not necessarily writing it, however, he's not writing it on his own time. But he doesn't have his own time anymore, right? Because he had children and he got married, right? Right? Which is, that's totally legitimate use of the rest of his time, right? We all have lives. So he's got to make choices, and it sounds like he's about to make a bad choice, which is he's going to try to do everything.
And those solutions just to, like, either, you know, not accept the Heartland State University job, or just, you know, get some of the responsibilities that he has already, and just make sure to get them taken care of instead of taking on new responsibilities and stuff.
No, I agree. I think also what he could realize is that either, as you said, he doesn't have to submit this grant, or he doesn't have to submit the perfect grant. Right? I mean, if you go into academia, and I don't know about engineering, but I think you and I overlap a lot, is the funding rate is usually between 10 and 20% anyway. That doesn't mean that you should submit crappy grants, but it also means that you may actually cross every T and dot every I, and still, 9 out of 10 times, they're not going to give you the money. But you've learned a lot in doing it. So
And you get feedback.
you'll get feedback. So he wouldn't hurt himself if he would just stop now at 10 p.m. or whatever it says, right? At night when he's about to basically make an ethical violation and say, I've done all I can do, right? And just wrap it up, submit it, get some feedback, in 6 months' time, rewrite it, or 9 months' time, rewrite it, and submit a better version. When he's no longer working for Professor Wilson, right? And when he's actually really working for HSU, right? Now what's going to happen if he does do it? If he does go ahead and submit the grant with the material from the model proposal. So if you didn't understand what happened was when he was a student, this happens all the time, his professor when he was a grad student gave him a proposal and said, help me review this, right? I think that's how it is. And then said, you know, this is a great looking proposal. Here, you should take a look at it. I'm reviewing it anyway. But he kept a photocopy of it, right? Right, he kept a copy for himself. So what happens then?
We eventually we found out,
Well, you know, possibly nothing, right?
possibly.
I mean, we have a service on campus called Turn It In. Probably have that at your universities, you know, if you're not at Clemson. And supposedly they start doing this now at NSF, where they actually scan our proposals and compare them to other documents. So it's getting closer and closer to the fact that people might actually be caught doing this sort of thing. So the same sort of like 21st century tools that are getting applied to students' assignments are now getting applied to professors' assignments, right? Our grant proposals. I mean, literally. So yeah, although I have a feeling it's an ethics gray area, he might not get caught. He would totally be within his rights to look at it as a model proposal and to rewrite the text, I think. Now, I don't know if you agree with me.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. But to lift it word for word as it's stated there, that's not right. Right? Because that proposal was submitted. So if anything, his moral compass should tell him, like, I could get caught. Right? He might not. But if he did, what happens to him? And his family?
Probably lose his job.
His career's over. Right? Yeah, it's over. And I've seen this happen to people. And I can send you to a Wikipedia article on a friend of mine who falsified data. And an MIT professor who falsified data, was locked out of his lab for 1 year while they investigated it. And he basically, at the end of the day, had to go into house arrest, pay over $500,000 in fines, and had to basically change his name to get a job. And had to take his wife's name just to get hired to do anything. So if you want to read the article, I can post you the Wikipedia. It's pretty easy to find. Just look up MIT Professor Biology Fraud and you'll find it. But it's someone that I know. And so yeah, these are not, so for the chance that he would submit a proposal that he could either submit and not have it perfect or submit it again in 6 to 9 months, he probably is making a bad choice, right? Because he could destroy his entire life and his family's life, at least the career that he set, path that he set. Not to mean he couldn't get a good job doing something else. But certainly he could actually, over this one little choice, destroy everything. And you can't imagine that Heartland State University, and it's probably intentionally named this way to make you think like it's not the greatest university in the world. It's not good for this university to have show up in the news with plagiarizing professor on the books. So they're assuming they've offered a job, they hope, to an ethical person, right? So they're a stakeholder in this. The funding agency, both the one that accepted the original proposal and the one he's funding, that he's trying to get funds from, they're stakeholders. And then you go back to poor Professor Wilson, who's paying this guy and not getting any work out of him, right? And imagine what happens to Professor Wilson if Charlie West gets caught, right? Then Professor Wilson is the guy that guy worked for that we all heard about who plagiarized that thing. Don't go work in Wilson's lab. He's the one with that guy who cheated. Who knows what else bad's coming out of that lab? It could destroy Wilson's career, right? It could destroy every single student in that lab, whoever is in there right now, not postdocs, but grad students and undergrads, trying to get work done in his lab. No one takes anything seriously out of Wilson's lab because it's in U.S. News that this guy actually falsified something. And I speak this from, this has happened, right? So the APS and AIP one you have for physics, for instance, you'll notice at the end there are addenda on authorship, and you'll notice there's a reference there to someone named Schoen. And it's drawn from a specific case, and that's a very high-profile case from the late 90s, early 2000s. And a lot of the rules that exist in physics for authorship rules and ethics are because of that one guy right there. And because of, I don't think I've even sort of figured out exactly how he pulled off what he pulled off, but it's an interesting case study to read. The amount of publications and the high profile and how everyone thought he was basically on the path to a Nobel Prize. And then it all just came crumbling down because it was all fake. Falsified publications, falsified grant proposals, everything. And then all the authors were implicated, co-authors I mean, because they basically implicitly said, as many of us would, right? You want to include me as an author? Great. Another thing on my CV, another thing on my resume. Not realizing that once we actually sign on the dotted line that we agree, then we actually agree to what's in that document, right? And so these people are all drawn into this terrible web. And so to disentangle from that and to make it clear, they had to make all these extra rules. So I say rules are put in place because people actually broke things and did bad stuff. This is a case where prior to that it was kind of par for the course. Yes, of course, I agree with that. Put me on the paper. Yes, I would love to have another publication. And now you're always like, I'm not sure I want to be on that. I see it more often now. People will choose not to be on publications. I mean, if they haven't any issue with it, they'll be like, that's okay. I'm not 100% sure. I'd rather not be involved. So, important decisions. So unfortunately this is not a true one, but as I say, there are references to true. The Schoen case is the most glaring example. The guy at MIT is another one that you can read. So there's one in biology and one in physics that you can look up. People made as this guy told me, made some poor decisions, and that was putting it mildly, and ended an entire career.